Okay, well, it looks like we have most everyone here and in the meeting. So thank you for joining us. This is our seventh RAC meeting. Okay, well, it looks like we have. Okay, we'll keep going. Seventh RAC meeting, and we have two things on our agenda for today to review the conceptual fee structure, and then to review the conceptual activity-based rule structure. Kevin, did you have anything you wanted to start with before we dive into the first agenda item?
No, unless you wanted to see if anybody had any feedback from anything that had kind of come up from previous, any thoughts, feedback.
Sure. Any questions, feedback before we get started? Okay, well, let's go to the review the conceptual fee structure.
All right, you should be able to see my screen now.
It's just coming up. Yes, we can see it.
Hold on, I'm trying now. I've got a technical issue on my end. I lost the screen of everybody else. There we go. Um, okay, so we are continuing from our last meeting. I know we kind of ran out of time and I did a quick run through, but just kind of in case people weren't on the meeting last time, I wanted to give a quick update on our updated timeline. I'm assuming you all have seen and gotten the memo on what is happening. But basically, we've added in 5 additional meetings, and we're expanding that out to basically once a month. So I think we canceled one meeting and we added in 5 additional, and that'll be taking our RAC through July, and then we'll be going out to the commission in September with public comment being in the October-November timeframe, and then kind of final agency review happening between December and March, with final adoption looking for April of 27 right now. And kind of a little bit of background as we were going through. I know I haven't shared a lot of updated documents with this group, and it's partly because I'm also drafting new stuff so we can get through it. But really, with the feedback internally and from RAC, we wanted to take a look at kind of how to maybe reapproach some different things. So that's some of what today is going to be looking at. And then we also needed some additional time just for internal coordination and those kinds of things. So we have a little bit more breathing room, and we'll kind of move from there. If you notice, I do have a hold, at least on this one, for the 5th of June. Our thought is, depending on how we're making it through the topics when we get to April and May, we may cancel that one. But for right now, I want to make sure it's held on everybody's calendar, and then we'll make sure we're not running out of time before this is done. And my hope right now, conceptually, is to have a full kind of initial draft of the rules for consumption by our internal and the RAC by May, so that way we can start kind of looking at things holistically, including those updates that the RAC or updates to some of the comments that the RAC has provided already. So it's just kind of high level where I'm hoping things will work out. So where do we sit today? We have made it through quite a bit of the rules. I will say we're kind of getting down to the more nuanced elements. We have looked at the fees previously. What I'm hoping to do today is to actually go through the concept fee rules, see if there's any real heartache with those. We did talk high level about the fee structure at the last meeting. Still going to open that up at this time to really kind of talk about, does the structure work? Are there some considerations as we refine it? And so that's kind of what we'll be looking at in the fees. And then we'll be looking at these bottom two here, the project specific criteria and general authorizations. I've put together the rules on those. Again, they're kind of first draft. I want to make sure that the concept works for everybody and that we're heading in the right direction. And then once we get through kind of this structure, What we'll be doing, and this is part of where the change happened for and why we were looking at more time, is I have actually drafted, oops, sorry, I've drafted these evaluation and permit review standards. Basically, they got, we want them to be more objective, but they got fairly lengthy and complicated because some of these standards are much more applicable to having objective criteria on a project by project type base, not on kind of an overall review standard base. And so it was starting to make it fairly complicated. So once I have the framework for these, I'll be moving a lot of the objective standards from this in and incorporating them into the activity specific standards, which will allow us to be more generic on our overall kind of high umbrella. And I'll show you that analogy here in a little bit, but having these be a little higher level and then having some specific elements and outlined down in the project specific criteria. So, and that'll be the same thing with permit conditions. So that'll all kind of come working together. So hopefully that makes sense. I know it'll make more sense once we see it all together, but that's where we stand right now. So this meeting we'll be looking at the fees and then the general authorization and application criteria, project specific criteria. So, and when I talk about the project specific, this is kind of a simplified version. It'll make more sense as we start talking about the fees, and I'll get more into this in a little bit. But when we talked last, I had multiple kind of levels down here under the general authorization. We've really looked at trying to simplify that, both for our staff, but also for the applicants. And so the way we're looking at this is we have this larger, alteration rules, which we've pretty much looked through. We'll have the project review standards that sit into that and kind of apply to everything. But then as we get into some of these, we'll have project specific standards, as I mentioned, and then we'll have general authorizations that have a lower fee. There are a subset of projects that per statute have kind of simpler, more predictable outcomes, less ability to have long-term impacts on the ocean shore, those types of things, and that's defined in statute, and we'll talk about those when we get into the general authorizations. And then those would have a 45-day process with a 14-day basically notice of our intent to issue them, that we've decided they meet, and it kind of, for lack of better terms, effectively would become kind of an appeal, but it's not really an appeal. It's more of a, hey, OPRD, we disagree with your decision. Here's why. And then we would, before we issued the general authorization, we would take those into consideration. And then there's a subset of them that would not have that review. So that's kind of that activity based. And as you see, there's a reminder across the top here, we'll break those down by some of the key project types that we encounter. And so that would be kind of a vertical run for each of those. And again, we'll talk more about that today. I just want to set that framework up because as we're talking about the fees, this is important. We're primarily going to be looking at these fees, but I am also going to be looking at for feedback on our general authorizations. We have had some initial feedback related to kind of, I'll say, the kind of two ends of the spectrum. One is, hey, we need to recoup our costs for processing the general authorizations. But then the other one being, well, some of these projects, if there is a significant cost, but yet they're, I'll say ocean shore restoration or ocean shore enhancement type projects, access, whatever that, well, and they're done by our partners or in support of the ocean shore, that there should be a lower fee for those, which then again comes back on that we're then aiding that cost, not the applicant. So those are some of the things that we'll want to have a dialogue as we're looking through these fee rules. So again, a little more background. When our current fees are not covering our costs, so we are looking at kind of changing. This was put into play through the recent House bill. And effectively what we're going to try to do is have the, as is noted on this bottom graphic here, we're going to try to have the cost of the agency and the application fees be commensurate where currently they're not. And currently some of the simpler projects we're subsidizing the cost, and then some of the larger ones, the applicants are paying way more than it actually cost us to process. Um, so we're going to be looking at that. And then we also got more flexibility. Currently, the statute actually defines our fee. I should say previously, the statute's now in effect. So as of January 1st, prior to that, it was $400, and that was plus cost a percentage of the construction costs. That was the fee calculation. We now have the ability to really take into consideration all of these portions down here in this 7B. So we have a lot of flexibility built into establishing these rules, and that's again some of what I'm going to be looking at from this group for feedback of, are we taking these considerations to heart in the right way? Are we organizing those fees between the different types, whether it's an emergency permit or an alteration permit or a general authorization? How are we balancing those fees across those? So what I've put together is a concept, and the numbers I'm using, and I know we've talked about this, I'm not going to go into it in much detail, but the numbers I'm using right now are based on some preliminary work I did to kind of see how much does it cost us to process and monitor, manage a permit through its life cycle versus how much does it cost for the program to, run in total. And so right now, again, being this kind of first run, if we look at what kind of our ideal program is, the cost per biennium would be about 1.7 to 2.6 million to have all the staff and the Department of Justice costs, those types of things. What I have used in the numbers that you'll see presented in the different graphs are based on this table here, kind of out to basically a 1.7 per biennium based on some existing permit loads, kind of some average permit loads. My caveat is this needs a lot more refining before it's final, but for the purposes of the discussion, these are definitely on the target. They just may not be a bullseye yet. So they're not out in left field somewhere. They are at least a good starting point. So I just want to kind of put that out there. It's going to take a little bit more work with our fiscal staff and managers to kind of refine this down a little bit, but at least we can kind of all see where we're starting on this. Before I get into the rules, any questions on kind of this approach, or how these numbers, what they mean, how they relate to the real world and the cost of the program? Okay. Oh, Diana.
I was just wondering if this represents current staffing or your ideal level of staffing.
So what I have on here is the ideal level, and that was based on some initial discussions with the program management, and kind of really trying to look at what is it that we need to do this program. And so currently we do not have an dedicated ocean shore manager. Our manager is actually shared between about 7 different programs, I think it is. And has statewide responsibility. And so it can be a challenge given some of the complexity and time and partnerships, and just that those connections for having that higher level manager. So looking at having a lower level manager within the program would help us be a lot more capable of responding to things and being able to look kind of longer term toward the program. So that's one of them. But other than that, basically it's our existing staff. We're at a pretty decent level. The other part of it is our Department of Justice costs, making sure that we have enough, for lack of better terms, I'll say insurance set aside so that when we have violations, when we have permit non-compliance and we need to engage Department of Justice, that we make sure we have that built into the costs to make sure that part of the program is there. Because currently what happens is we just have to find the money somewhere. And so that's what we're looking at too.
Because I know that in our conversations, there's been a lot more discussion about education and whether that's with practitioners or homeowners or planning departments. And so I don't know, I'm just wondering if you're projecting enough staff to do, well, twofold. One, that education component. I know you've also talked about developing online sources and tools, either through your website, standalone education. Um, so I kind of wonder if you don't have enough staff in your ideal scenario to really address the things that we've asked you for in this process, or that you have identified as being needed. And then we are making changes that, as we see already in your guys' tenure, you're interpreting code differently. And that has led to some people who are used to receiving approvals, receiving denials. So I just wonder if in your projection for legal fees, you've taken that into account. So not just holding the line, but advancing the line as you're implementing, a more rigorous process. So I would encourage you to, really look at, are you going to have the people that you need to do the things that we, from the document that you presented us from the 90s has asked that OPRD is doing.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you. Anybody else? Great. Okay. So and I can move over to the rules, but basically now my thought was we would kind of do what we've been doing, going through line by line, and or section by section within the rules, and really kind of take a look at the structure of the rules, see if there's any feedback or comment on that structure and content of the actual rules, and go from there. I'm hoping everybody, I know we had some potential problems. Did everybody get a link to the document? Have you been able to open it?
I haven't been able to yet, but I'll follow along and then I can read through it after.
I'll re-email out the correct link. Sorry that it seems like it was the wrong internal link instead of the external link.
It would be great too to get that shared document so that we could make comments on the document for each of us to be able to see.
And I
Yeah.
know that the document actually in the Google Drive was actually not the one that was the most up to date. It seems like it was not as complete as the one you shared under the external OPRD site.
Katie, do you have any thoughts on that as far as the Google Doc? Because I haven't dealt with that one. So.
And I was only updating new rules, so I did not update any Google Docs with the things that you put on the share drive at this point.
Okay, because I just made a comment because I think I just made a comment at some point in the document when I said like, oh, it was similar up to that point, but after I think things have been added that were not in the version in the Google Drive. Yeah.
All right, so I will go ahead and I'm going to share the text over here, and we'll just kind of flip back and forth between these. But what I'm going to kind of do is I'll do a quick summary, but we'll go through 1 through 3 here first. And basically the way the rule's structured is setting up this term of the fee range, establishing kind of what the fees are, and then the base application fee by the type of application. again, I used, just as a reminder, I used the new DSL rule template as an example for this. And really what I thought there was a lot of validity to it, just because it helps cover kind of that complexity of the type of applications we get without it being, hey, this exact type of application gets this type of fee. But there is probably a different way of doing it. So that is, at least initially, this is the way I kind of framed it up. And as part of this group, I'd love to be able to hear some feedback on these structures. One thing I do want to show here before, if you notice within these, and you'll see it in the rules themselves, but it's easier to show on this summary sheet, they each have like 1,000 to 2,000 or 5,000 to 10 to 20. This is a placeholder for a concept that I will show, which is called the fee range. I don't know if this is the right range. Again, I really want to get that feedback from this group, but it's a concept that Katie brought up that we've used apparently for some of our other OPRD fees, to where by rule we adopt it within a range. And then what that allows is the director to then update outside of the rulemaking more fluidly. So if we get in and just do a assessment, it's like, hey, the fees aren't actually covering our program costs. We look back over the last year, we missed the target. We could look at that and reevaluate and adjust within that fee range. So that is kind of where that comes from. So just showing that. Diana, is your hand still up, or did you have a question? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw these up, and we'll go through 1 through 3 here on the screen. So the language is in front of us. Can give me any comments as we go down through it. But number 1 here is that fee range that I mentioned, basically just outlining that fee range that I just mentioned to you, as far as the high and low that we can adjust that the director can adjust. Felicia.
Yeah. So I had a comment. I think might be a good place to add under fee range, some justification, something to explain that those fees also reflect the time basically needed to complete the review, or the complexity of the request, something like that, because I can see, like, reading through the document, there is some kind of explanation of what the different fees are, because you have so many different kind from application fee, tier, annual, variance, modification, and transfer fee. But especially for people to understand, okay, there is a big change in price, and it doesn't have to detail everything that this fee will cover, but at least to explain why there is some different cost, for like some different value for all of these, but just explaining that it varies maybe based on the time the staff will review those, or the complexity of the request. Maybe just a couple of sentences about that.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, and to clarify too, with this fee range, what I think the intent would be is, when we adopt, we would start with the lowest fee, and that's what we would publish on our application forms, our website, and then that would change over time as we reassess, if we find out that, hey, we hit that target too low, or we get a big inflationary change, or something of that nature hits to where we're able to move that up. So the fee range wouldn't move up and down like between a project. We would start out low. It would basically keep us from having to go back to rulemaking each time we have to adjust the fee. So there's kind of two or three different ways that I've seen fees put into play. One is you just adopt a static fee. And then the problem is if you don't update, that fee isn't enough, or you adopt a static fee, but you put in some sort of annual inflationary rate. The issue with that is usually it's some sort of percentage or whatnot, which then ends up getting some really weird fees that include pennies and other things that just kind of, again, it makes it clunky. Or there's this kind of approach, which is more of a, hey, we'll adjust it based on um, and have one level each time we change it. So, Felicia, go ahead.
Yeah, and sorry, actually, my comment actually was going better under number two, like fees, just to explain the difference between all of those versus, like, yeah, but I get it, what you mean by fee range. And after, yeah, my comment was going more under like, let's say maybe number two for like the fees to explain the difference between all those fees. Yeah.
Sorry, having a technical issue on my other end here. I want to make sure I get this comment captured. Diana.
Yeah, I just have a question on 2B. Do you not take the fees in before you start the process of reviewing the application? I'm reading this to say that they have until the end to provide the fee.
Okay, so there'll be there's basically two fees, I'll say for there's the application fee, which would be due, let me go back here. There'd be this base fee. So this fee under number 3 here would be due at the time of application receipt. And so effectively this is, we'll call it the cost of reviewing the application.
Okay.
And then you have the tiers, which we'll get into. And the tiers, and that's why 2B says we'll notify them of the preliminary tier fee. That will be based on the project type, and it's once we're basically moving forward, we'll notify them of that, and it's due before we issue a permit. And that effectively is the cost of managing that permit and the enforcement, the compliance, that type of stuff. So that is kind of how that was broken down. And the reason, one of the values in splitting it this way is, I'll give a somewhat recent example. We had a permit or an application that came in, and they had a $45,000 application fee. We had another one that had almost over $100,000 application fee. Well, the one with over 45,000, we ended up denying that. And first off, it didn't cost us $45,000 to review that application and make that denial. Now, if it would have been appealed, whatnot, we might have spent that. It wasn't appealed. But when you start having higher initial permit fees like that, it also can make it more likely that somebody's going to appeal because they've got a large investment in just an application review. But the other part is if you deny, it can also be a little bit, it's not commensurate with the work that was done on that. And so it's almost a little bit of a penalizing an applicant just for applying. And so it's how do you balance that and have a fair fee that covers our costs to review it. And then you have that tier coming in to say, okay, well, now if we're getting ready to issue you this, then you got to be willing to give, basically provide the funding for us to monitor, maintain, and manage your product or the permit and our responsibilities that go along with that. And so that's kind of how that's framed out. Does that make more sense?
Yes, that helps a lot. Thank you. That's great.
Any other thoughts on, sorry, going between monitors here and I'm trying to make sure I'm looking at everything the right way. Any other thoughts on 1 or 2? Kind of just open that up. And then as a reminder with 2, and it's there may be some other fees, I'll call them fees, but this is something that we'll have to figure out how, and maybe 2 needs to be updated to include this. But if there are things like some of the statutes require a just compensation fee, so that's pipelines and cables and the if there was like mineral extraction, those types of things, there's a just compensation related to those. And then we'd also have mitigation fees that, again, based on the type of project, based on the impacts could be, but those are really kind of viewed outside of the application and permit fee, which is this is focusing on, and those are more of mitigation payments because they're related to the actual impacts of the project. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear too, as we look at these fees. So, 3 basically is, as I said, kind of outlining the base fee tiers, and the way that was effectively framed, as you saw back on this initial slide, is the first one is benefits to the ocean shore, the second one is kind of private benefit, and then the third one is complex and controversial type projects. And that's the easiest way to kind of summarize what I tried to write in here, but really it's that trying to go back to what is commensurate with the scale and scope of the project. And it also, by like having the type A, it also helps some of our local partners by not having a larger fee for habitat restoration, public access, those type of things. Alicia.
Yeah, I just wanted to have a clarification. Are general authorizations completely separate, or are they going to fall also under application type A?
They will be separate.
Okay.
What you'll see in the draft general authorization language that I used right now, I'm kind of trying to keep it around that 1,000 as kind of thinking, oh, commensurate, comparable, but honestly, we need to have some more dialogue because again, using an example of like Department of State Lands and their fee structure, they have one fee for all their general authorizations. There is, and I think it's 700 to 1,000. I forget where it is, and I have to look again. But then there's also the idea, like we talked about, where hey, if there are some of the general authorizations will be for public benefit, some of them won't be. Some will be really simple. Some may be a little more complicated. Do we want to have a general authorization fee that's based on the type of general authors or the activity that the general authorization covers, or do we want to have one just a flat fee that applies to any general authorization? And what level is that? That's in, and I think that's going to be a separate discussion, but it's just a great time to talk about it because I do want to also have it be somewhat commensurate, or at least not have it be, oh, well, it costs more to go through a general authorization than it does to go through a full permit, right? So it's kind of how do you balance that and tie those things together. So
Okay, because I had some comments for like general authorizations, but maybe we can wait for that until we review the other document.
let me just put a note in here, just so if nothing else, we'll come back to it. Because I also think in this fee document, we may want to reference the general authorizations. And again, that's part of the lumping and splitting discussion that I haven't necessarily got to, of where, do you put all the fees in one place? Or do you have the fee in each, again, if we go with each type of general authorization, we could just build that and say, hey, applying for this general authorization is cost this much. And it's built into that general authorization rule. So there's, again, it's that a little bit of a chicken and egg discussion right now. And Felicia, if you have any comments, I can also jot it down now too, just so we don't end up missing it later too. If you wanted to get something on the record that I can look at as I'm refining these, because like I said, we're kind of having this open dialogue. And so if you wanted to chime in on something, I could, again, just put it in here. And even if we talk about it later, I'm fine with that as well.
Okay, so I can just add quick. It was, for example, yeah, my question, it was because I saw that it was the same fee range that you had for general authorization. That's why I thought it was under that. But I think it would be, yeah, like you mentioned, helpful to have all the fees mentioned somewhere because if going to be fees for general authorization. And my comment was more about, for example, I know at some point in that document that was focusing, I think, on access. It was 00A1 and 2. And I think at some point it was at line 242. It was mentioning also that they will need, general authorization, for example, for things like grading and leveling of sand for installation of mobility mats, for example, and things like that. And I know that, looking at all the fees for like some communities have been really trying to make an effort to get Mobi mats. I know like OGVA have been providing like several grants for Mobi mats. And after it's something that I have to remove every year and put back every year. And then I was thinking it might be kind of like steep for those communities to, if they have to pay even for like a general authorization. So I was wondering if there is some ways, like if it can be in some cases, and I think you mentioned that in a table earlier, that some could be maybe waived or like lowered, because in this case, it should be really to provide access to the community and visitors, and especially for like, like the disabled community, but not only.
And I appreciate that. And I will say that was the dilemma as I was going through these rules and trying to incorporate the comments that we had discussed previously as a group. Is kind of the feedback I got was, we need to have the fees that cover the program. Great, we're going that route, and that's kind of how this is proposed. And that there is a cost by the, even these public entities coming in for, and I'll just keep it at what you're talking about for the Mobi mats. There is still a cost associated with reviewing it, looking at it, monitoring it, whatever. But then it's that, at what point in time, do you have these kind of special and unique little niches that fit in there, or how does that go around? It's a little bit of a struggle to kind of find that right balance. And so I appreciate the feedback, because that was one I looked at too, and I was like, yeah, this is something we can throw in there. And it's like, gosh, what is an appropriate fee for this? Because it almost seems like there shouldn't be one if if we set up the standards and the conditions around it. So again, I'm with you, and I think that's going to be a struggle as I clean these up. Megan?
Yeah, I had two questions. I had a call with someone from the Department of State Lands yesterday who is, I think, doing a different rulemaking, maybe for cable landings or cable permitting. Maybe it's like Natalia, or I can find her name. Anyway, I was wondering if you were talking with her, because they were also thinking about fees and permitting costs and stuff for that. And then they were asking me some questions about that. So do you know this person?
I'm going to defer to Laurel. She's been the one coordinating on the cable rulemaking.
Her name is
Yeah, it's Natalia. I'm on
Natalia.
that.
Okay.
I'm an advisor on that rulemaking, Megan. Yeah,
Okay.
so we are trying to coordinate with DSL.
Cool. Okay. Well, they had an interesting, I thought, interesting proposition that if the cable company wanted to purchase or implement some resource for scientific measurements based on their newly laid cable, then they would give them some kind of like break in the cost of things. And I was wondering if maybe for these, I don't know what that would be, but for the projects that are complex and potentially harmful to the shore, ocean shore, is there something that the community might want, like as, I don't know, in exchange for doing this project? And then could they potentially invest money in that direction, as long as OPRD was covering their costs and things?
I think where I would see that fitting is under mitigation. because it would be proposed as, hey, we are impacting the ocean shore. There's these other mitigation costs. We'd like to do something, in lieu of paying those costs, we'd like to do something different, right? And then that way it could be evaluated against the impacts. That's kind of where I would see it versus the application fees.
Okay,
But
yeah, that
again,
makes sense. That makes sense what you're saying.
because I'm just going to go back to this last Amazon one. That was kind of our most recent, most complicated one. The amount of time we spent before they even had an application in, meeting with them, we had sometimes bi-weekly bi-monthly and monthly meetings off and on. I mean, it was one of those things where we just had so much time and energy and public meetings, and so there's a significant amount of staff time that goes into those, and then monitoring them too. And there's always that long-term impact. But I think that is something that I would say could fit within that mitigation framework of, hey, instead of giving you guys, parks a check, we'd rather do something else. And I mean, that could be, hey, we want to create a new, high-end beach access point because we've already got our equipment out there. And, hey, if it's something that actually moves things forward, we can have that as a discussion, right?
Okay, so maybe
but-
that could be put as, or I don't, like I said, I haven't read this doc, so maybe you already have it written there, but maybe that can be written as an option.
Okay.
Would it be better to just say that if you are going to allow a cable that obviously has negative impacts, the state, has the right to avail themselves of a benefit from it? I mean, would it be better to, rather than horse trading around some of this stuff, just say, if we want to add something to this infrastructure, we can. That's just part of doing it. Rather than, and I would keep it separate from the mitigation, which is, you need to bring for example, the ocean floor back to as pristine a condition as possible and those sorts of things. But I think you should just say it is our right to leverage this infrastructure, however it best serves the state of Oregon, and take it from there.
Okay, thank you. And Diane, if you have any thoughts on kind of how that language would sit, I'm not kind of, at least initially right now, I'm not really kind of putting my finger on how we'd want to integrate something like that, because it's kind of just a little bit of a blank check and so I'd want to try to make sure we're tying it back to our legal authorities and jurisdiction and those kind of, and the impacts. So again, something that I would love to have any thoughts that you can put down that are good here.
I have no legal background, so but I can reach out and I'm sure DOJ would be able, but I will see what I can find. I guess it's just also, it's like it's a difference of approach. The
Yeah, and I
state
guess
is
I'm just saying,
offering a really valuable thing, and we don't have to come begging for a beach access or whatever. We can, we can say this is what works for us.
yeah, and I guess that's what I'm looking for, is not necessarily a legal answer, but more of like, just if you can describe better what you're thinking, or maybe a couple of
Right.
examples of what that would look like. Because
Yes.
again, when I'm hearing you saying like, oh, well, we reserve the right to, well, that's kind of what mitigation already is doing, is saying, hey, if you have an impact, which there is an impact from the cable, here's the suite in which we can expect, you to operate within, versus more of a blank check. So yeah, like I said, I just like to know more understanding, and then I can always, as I frame that up, reach out to DOJ and have those discussions. But like I said, I just want to understand more cleanly what you're proposing. So that's all I'm
Okay, and
asking.
I guess I need a better understanding of mitigation. if that is defined anywhere, I would love to get my hands on that.
Yeah, and I know some of it is in the application requirements that we went through, which I think is in that Google document. I'm not looking at that right now, but I believe which could help you because it did frame up what needed to be in a mitigation plan.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. Any other thoughts on the base application fee? Any feelings or thoughts on the values that are in there? And I know we talked about this really high level last meeting. Jackie.
Yeah, so I have a question related to emergency permits that are issued. Say it's like for example, 30-foot tall bluff that's near vertical and undermined at the bottom, and they need to shore it up with some sort of protection because that's also public risk. Would that automatically be application type C once it turns around to retroactively?
So I'd have to go back through and connect the dots because we do have the rules that specify where the emergency is at. I would say realistically it would fit into B. And that's when we'll get into the kind of that. I have a document here that talks about the tiers too, but it would probably automatically go into B for some of those. And that is, again, I think a different dialogue we can have through this discussion too, is there's kind of a couple different ways to approach emergencies. One is you just have a flat emergency fee, and then and that just sits to the emergency. The other is kind of what I believe how DSL kind of framed it, where it's you tie the emergency also back to. The more I'm thinking about it, and the more you bring it up here, I've kind of keep going back to just having a base emergency fee, especially since under the current proposed emergency, it's limited to temporary, it's placement, it's some of those repair and maintain kind of. It's not, go out and build a full revetment. It's you do something to slow, kind of mitigate the erosion during that short term, and then what you bring back is what then dictates kind of this application type and tiering, right? For if you were looking at doing something full long term, because putting that into kind of practice, if somebody came out and said, "Wow, we've got a very high level erosion and almost nothing left between our house and the beach. We'd like to dump some large boulders there. We're Goal 18 eligible. We would like to dump some, have it there temporarily." And then they ultimately come back with a dynamic revetment and rebuilding the dune. I'm just going to go full nature-based, non-structural, and that becomes the proposed solution. Well, that's going to have a whole different fee structure than if it would have, instantly been turned into a full rock revetment. And so I think that's where I'm kind of, as we're having these discussions and I'm blowing out through, that's kind of mentally where I'm going. But I would appreciate having, your thoughts on that, and how do those fit together? Because I do see some potential complexities. I won't say problems, complexities.
Yeah. I think, separating it likely would be the most clear path. Otherwise, it feels like it goes in somewhat of a never-ending loop. I'm not too sure. I think some of the language around private and public benefit feels confusing as well to me, because like for application type B, for example, there are a lot of public projects that will provide private benefit versus projects where they're primarily for private benefit. So there might be some language that can make that more clear.
Gotcha. Okay. John?
Yeah, how often do you have an emergency that doesn't turn into another permit? I mean,
So I will just kind of say part of that is taking those 94 recommendations and implementing them. In the past, it was, I'll say prior to Tyler and I coming on, it almost seemed like it became if you claim an emergency, then you get a riprap permit. And that is not the way the rules were written previously. It was
right,
how we kind of, as I'll say, as previous staff had interpreted things. And so we've, over the last few years, Tyler, have been implementing the rules kind of as written. And those have been fewer, but we only get like one every couple of years from emergencies. But yeah, in the past, it was kind of a specific, like, oh, well, we had an emergency. Now that's our justification. And what we're trying to do, based again on the 94 recommendations and some other things, is try to separate those two processes where emergency it's a pause button to give you the time to then actually design a project, and you need to go through the design steps. And again, I think in the past it was viewed as, well, yeah, the emergency, you don't have to go through the design steps and the alternatives analysis. You now have justification for rock. And that was kind of the, again, perception that was out there. So how many in the past, how many have done that? I think probably a majority of them converted straight from some sort of structural element to a permanent structural element.
just it seems like if an emergency permit is taken out, it's going to eventually turn into a project that's going to have its own independent permit later on. Yeah, I agree with you at that point. Some flat rate for an emergency permit actually makes a lot of sense. It's, you're paying for an event. Staff gets involved. They take a look at what's going on. Some initial authorization is given, and then you're going to be seeing another permit application for a permanent revetment or something like that come in later on, and then they're going to be paying a fee for that. So at that point, I don't know that you have to start thinking about ranges on emergency permit fees. So just my thoughts.
Okay. And I will say the other kind of change that has happened too, John, to answer kind of your question too, with things like the legislative guidance too on the preference being for non-structural, and really trying to kind of move down that, is we do need to kind of have that break as well from what we've had in the past. Is that there's more, I mean, even though that's kind of what our rules already said, trying to build onto that and make them much clearer that is the pathway is, it's a pause button. Then you get to look at a longer term solution, but you still have to give the preference to those non-structurals and nature-based.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know you've got other adjustments you're making as you move forward. So I guess my thought is, if you have something, if you have an emergency process where it's an immediate trigger to another type of application process, that's one thing. But if that emergency process is going to then transition into something that maybe a general authorization or something like that, you still have these other fee structures that should cover that as you move forward. I'm not sure. There's a point where you may or may not be recouping the cost of staff time through that permitting process, but in the terms of a project that's beneficial to the ocean shore, then there's a policy question about at what point do we want to, we want to encourage more of this and discourage more of that. So how do you want to shift that fee structure around to make that happen? So, but that's something that I'll leave that up to other people. I'm just looking at it from that point of view as well. So yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the tiers, I'll jump back out to my presentation too, and kind of we'll go and look at that a little deeper too, because I think what you just said is kind of what I was trying to get at with these tiers as well. So that there's an incentive for things like the non-structural and a disincentive for structural. I mean, part of it is there's potentially more construction, more monitoring, more other things that can maybe come along with more of a complex and more of a hardened structure. I'll say in the short term, and it's that trade-off too of we're also trying to kind of have that carrot and a stick a little bit to help the decision making support and the fees to support that decision making. So okay, anything else on 3? All right, I'm going to jump back out to tiers. So basically with the tiers, it kind of jumps in this range here, to where each of these builds based on, and this is a very high level summary on the side here, but basically it's trying to build on how much time and energy does it actually take to monitor and manage these projects, and what does that actually look like in the real world. And so what it's based on, and before we go to the actual rule language, is this document here, which I have the concept tiers for RAC review. Oops, sorry. I want to make sure I give you the right version, not the one I'm going to take notes on. Is having oh, sorry, I'm struggling here. Technology is killing me right now. There we go. So this tiering structure, what I modeled this, stole it straight from DSL, kind of made it my own because I thought it made a lot of sense to at least get the concept through. Is as you saw those tiers, I gave kind of the high level summary, but each of these tiers has something that is outlined in it. And so just kind of started, I'm going to kind of not go through each one specifically right now, but I just want to make sure we kind of all understand the concept here. But like if you look at this tier 1, it's by a public body, and it is really looking at some of these pieces that are already in statute, already in rule, where this is something where obviously it's ocean shore restoration type projects, if there's any habitat work, whatnot. This can, with this recreational, this can also be viewed as applying to kind of restoration of access, those types of things. And then individual of a group of recreational activity, that is something like we'll say like sandcastle contests, or those type of things where we have these larger events that happen. And then there's public access ways, maintaining maintenance and repair of those. So kind of being able to build things into that structure. Whereas if you go up to these upper tiers, you'll see things like it's erosion control that's less than 100 feet and includes non-nature based structural elements. So basically just gray riprap with no offsetting, or it includes natural product removal of more than 500 yards that's not covered by a tier 1 activity. And so kind of throwing those things out there to where it's, okay, what are these things that are not necessarily in the best interest of the ocean shore, but also things that maybe have a higher impact. Therefore, they also have higher monitoring requirements by our staff to make sure things are being done in the correct way and that the public interest is being met while those are happening. And so there also has this kind of bump up where, again, reference here to tier 5, which is a little bit narrower based, but then it's, hey, if one of these other things hits in there. So if you have if it's the site's an current enforcement action, or if it's basically the result of an enforcement action, those kinds of things, there's a little bit of a penalty that goes along with that, and because we'll have to keep a closer eye on that. And then that bumping all the way up to tier 7, where it's again, new pipelines and cables. It's erosion control that's basically riprap or seawalls that are 100 feet or longer. Kind of just going to those elements again. It's building that as you can see. So that was the intent behind this table, is to have that. You kind of start off on these ocean shore positive, and you get toward the most impactful, most undesirable, most complex type projects as you move down in these tiers. So that is how this is framed up, and what that looks like when you put it into practice is something like this. And I'm going to focus here in the middle of this because this is erosion control, and it's probably the best way to kind of frame up this linear kind of thought process, to where you would, if you had a non-structural nature-based solution, basically looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, it's by doing that, the state's asking for this as public beneficial, and it is the lowest end of those, or lower end of those tiers, and so you have a much lower rate than if you came in and had versus if you came in and had a full structural non-nature based solution greater than 100 feet. You're going to have the highest fees associated with it. So that's kind of, and you kind of see between that there's that gradation. So the more non-nature based you get, the longer you get, those type of things, the way that it'll kind of change that ratio. So that's at least through a kind of conceptual exercise what this would look like in practice. And John, I think that kind of gets at what you were bringing up, and again, looking at that way. So again, that's where I'm looking for the feedback from this group as we look at the actual rule language, is that's kind of how it ends up framing it up. John, go ahead.
Are there additional nuances to this, or are these fee structures going to be working from these linear feet calculations? Or, I mean, I guess I'm wondering what other factors would affect those permit fees.
Well, and that's what this table does. So again, using this as a model from DSL, this is how they actually more or less how they frame theirs up, is having these criteria that fit in here, and you just kind of read through it and which one fits the best, and that's the criteria that fits in there. And so as you look, obviously in these lower tiers, it's less impactful, less amounts, whatever that is. And
have you thought about using also a ratio of cost of the actual, in the case of constructing an asset like a cable landing or riprap, a shoreline protective structure? I mean, it doesn't have to be the entire fee. It just, I'm thinking as a component to calculating the fee. So you take the value of the asset that they're constructing and use a portion of that to adjust the fee up or down. I don't know if that helps you target your fees, or if it doesn't. It's just a thought.
Yeah, and we did, and it is one of the criteria that isn't allowed in the legislation. It is also how our current fee is based, even though it's based primarily on that. The issue that I'll be blunt. It can be extremely challenging to get that information from an applicant. Yes, there's some value in getting it from an applicant because you can ask more specific questions like, what sort of monitoring are you doing, or what sort of pre-planning are you doing, and those things come into consideration, so it can help on that aspect. But it has been very challenging to get that. And then the other side of it is sometimes you might have a project that has less impact to the ocean shore, but costs more than something that might have less impact to the ocean shore. And that would then kind of turn around that that calculation that the least impact alternative is actually your permitting fees would be more. And so I just think that the problem with the construction cost fees is just it's a lot of extra legwork, and I'm not sure that it actually gives us the incentive or disincentive that a normal fee structure could, and it's not necessarily based on how much time and energy it takes us to monitor that application either, right?
Yeah, actually,
So
that does make a lot of sense, and that tracks because I can understand. It's a little easier for me. There's a construction square footage value that we have generic values we can grab and calculate our own asset value. But I don't know how you would do that for a riprap structure necessarily, or for a cable landing, or for a lot of other things you see in your particular permitting arena. So I can understand that being the situation. So yeah, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I really appreciate that feedback and uh, contrast there. Thank you.
sorry, just want to make sure I got a note in here. Let's see, I think Felicia, I knew I saw a hand up.
Yeah, so while we're on this table, I had a comment related to the language, because for each tier you have a list of criteria, and sometimes it's not clear if it has to be all the criteria or some of them. I know sometimes you use the words, and or,
Okay.
but it's not consistent. So sometimes the headline says, tier 5 include projects that meet one or more of the following criteria. That helps, but it's not like that for all of them. So I will make sure that
Okay.
it's set or more consistent, or like just to clarify what needs to be, what is one of the criteria, what is not. Yeah. It is like either or and.
Thank you. Rhiannon.
Sorry, couldn't find my mute button. Just to echo what Felicia just said, we've gotten feedback from Steve in the past on things to be careful about using and or statements as well. So he might give you the same feedback if you show it to him.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna get a lot of those because we have a lot of lists. But yeah, no, and that Felicia, you brought up a really good point. I think honestly, I'll be blunt on this. I was kind of throwing this together before that last meeting, and I didn't come back to it before this one, but I think this was again that I'm gonna say that's in that concept level, but you're absolutely right, is even in the concept being able to understand which is applying. And I think as we get to the final, it's really what I'd like to make sure is before I spend too much more time cleaning this up is, is this group even good with this concept, or do we need to some extent think of a different way of doing it? Fewer tiers, different ranges, having a simpler fee structure that then has some modifiers. Like I'll just say, if you're a public agency, you get a 25% discount, or I mean, whatever, those kind of things, right? It's just like, hey, we're gonna have a flat fee, and then we go up or down by a percentage if you have certain things. Again, there's probably a dozen different ways that we could do this, and that's where I'm looking for some feedback from this larger group too, to see if I'm chasing down the wrong rabbit hole or not. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I kind of feel like I keep cutting Charlie off. The just one kind of maybe a suggestion. It's really kind of theoretical. I don't know if it helps or not, but time. So, are you going to be on the ocean shore for a month or 3 months or 2 weeks or whatever? I mean, if you charge them the units of time that they're actually taking up space on the ocean shore, I mean, one, that might incentivize them to get off the beach and shoreline faster, and that may or may not make sense. It's just a thought. So anyway, thanks.
And That's a really good point. I had thought about that for the mitigation side of, I'll just say very simple concept, like a daily rental type of thing, where it's like, hey, if you're going to be on the beach, you got to pay X amount, for each day. But, that's a valid point to also think about, because the longer they're on the beach, the more time and energy we have to spend monitoring it and babysitting it and dealing with calls and all the other stuff. And so I that's actually not a bad thing to consider in how this fee structure lays out. Charlie, I saw your hand up earlier. I want to make sure we get back to you.
No, if I keep lowering my hand, somebody else asked the question that I had. So I think you covered it. The and/or was a flag I had as well, and I think you kind of unpacked some of the rationale that I was looking for earlier in the question. So I think you covered everything.
Okay. Jackie.
So looking at the document we were looking at before with the language that references this OAR,
Yeah.
it says during review of an application or permit modification. Is that during initial review, or are you saying it could happen anytime throughout the review process?
So let me pull this up here. So we're looking at it. So within that, I see what you're getting at here. So I'm gonna go back up here so they're under 2C. So this may be a duplication. It may be an issue of a copy and paste. Under 2C, it has no, not 2C. Where is it at? I know we were looking at it earlier, and it said when we would notify you the tier.
25 days.
Oh, there it is. B. Sorry, 2B. That basically, so effectively getting that out 25 days before the permit decision deadline. So that would be for these tiers. So that's going to be that would be the when the notification would happen.
Okay. Because there are pretty significant ranges between the tiers. At that point, would there be an option to pull out if they're not like it? It just seems like that's something the applicant would want to know earlier on, but I understand you can't necessarily.
And that's a bookend. My thought, just kind of thinking through, and again, any feedback would be great, is that when we do a completeness review, because there's usually a communication that would happen, is I think that's where we would also provide some feedback, like saying, hey, it's complete. Based on this preliminary completeness review, it seems like you might be, and again, you could be tier 6 or 7. We still need to look at it because we haven't necessarily done a technical review. But it's like, hey, it looks like you could be a tier 6 or a 7, and maybe even some preliminary mitigation thoughts, at whether or not they've provided enough mitigation or not. I think that's where some of that stuff would at least be initially communicated.
Yeah.
But then what it would be is, once we're getting ready to actually issue and kind of moving down that path, because again, this fee is based on moving toward issuing a permit. And so once we're kind of at that point, that's where that 25 is like, okay, hey, now we determined the tier is this level. That's what's actually going to be due before we can actually issue this permit. So that's kind of what that 25-day notice is that for that final, like, we're ready to issue, where's the final payment? And that would be the same thing with mitigation and other things. It's like, okay, now we need to have these things. Otherwise we're just not able to issue.
Gotcha.
Charlie?
Yeah, I guess maybe similar to Jackie's question, just kind of understanding when would the applicant know? And is there sort of a declared intention early in the process for what tier we're aiming for? Because it could be a big surprise. And I'm just trying to think about like how many stopgaps are there in this process where someone would be able to alter something. I guess I'm thinking a lot about the engineering process and the development of plans. There's a lot that can significantly change in that space. And so it is a little bit of a moving target. And I don't know if that's fixable or not.
Kevin, you're muted.
Well, that's weird. Who's muting me on the other? So Charlie, question for you is, and Jackie as well. I mean, this table and that would be published, and be something that when somebody's applying, that we would make them aware that, hey, here, there's effectively, wait, before you apply, you need to understand there's actually going to be a second fee, and here's kind of the framework under which that is developed. Are you, effectively, are you sure you want to move forward? And so I'm trying to figure out if you have any thoughts on how we would procedurally want to try to tie that in, because it might not fit into rules, it might fit in just in our procedures.
I'm
Because
thinking more process than probably something written in rule is what I was thinking, but yeah.
Yeah, agreed. That was my thought.
Okay. Okay. And we can go back. Anybody have any other thoughts on that tier sheet?
Hey, Kevin.
Oh, sorry.
I did.
Go ahead, Rihanna. Yeah.
It's all good. Yeah, I like the idea of letting people know so that they're not just like caught off guard. Suddenly they're in tier 7. And maybe having some sort of like internal and then an external version of like a checklist or a table so that as they're kind of filling out an application or even just like a pre-application meeting of like, these are the preliminary ideas that we have, like where would that put you roughly? So maybe you're not tied to it, might be between a 3 and a 4, and that would be up to you guys to be discretionary on that, but it would give them some sort of an idea going into the process so that they're not just like surprise.
Like that idea. Okay, great. Appreciate that. Okay, John.
Yeah, and I got to thinking about this. So you'd be collecting this permit fee up front, and you'd be issuing the permit, and then they'd begin doing work, and then you had I saw a procedure here for request for modification of permit conditions, transfer of an authorization. So you have a step there where you can take additional fees for that. It just seems that there's going to be situations where you're going to have during projects, you're going to have things are going to change, and I know you want to get the fee established before you issue the permit, and you don't want to surprise anybody with additional fees afterwards. But it seems there's going to be situations where you're going to want to maintain some flexibility. So if their project expands on the same permit, you can come back and say, well, yeah, you can do that, or we have to adjust this or that, but you're going to have to pay these additional fees. I don't know if that's actually in there somewhere. I might be missing it, but Just wanted to maybe check and see if I'm not, basically.
Yeah, I have it down. It's highlighted on the screen right now. And basically it's saying that
Gotcha.
we'll look at it, and then we basically send them a notice that
Okay.
what's outstanding.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Jackie, you had your hand up, it looked like.
Yeah, it's related to the table language. I didn't know if you're gonna jump back there.
I can jump back to the table. Said well, maybe I can. I'm sorry. Sorry for technical. My mouse cursor keeps disappearing on me, and I don't know why. It's frustrating because then I can't. I have to go hunt for it again, and it's not like it's just on another screen. It literally is like in the background. So, all right, we're out on the table.
Just generally the project tier column, some of the labels aren't super intuitive. I don't know if there's like a language section that defines what these are.
Those are, quite frankly, they're food for thought for us today. Again, part of it is how far do I take the language down to have this concept discussion? And really the column to the right is what makes the most sense, or always, the most content, right? But I do appreciate that feedback, because you're absolutely right. Those were kind of that. I just want to have something that kind of has a reference to what we're talking about as we look at this, and kind of make sense.
Yep, understood.
But thank you for pointing that out, because I honestly I'm just reading over it now. I've read them so many times. It's like, oh yeah. All right. I'm gonna jump back over to the rules then. And we can always jump back to the table or whatever as we're going through this. So all right, so going down through the rest of these rules, basically there is a recapture for tier 6 and 7, and this was kind of put in for, I'll say, primarily going to be things like cable crossings, those types of things where there's potentially a significant amount of additional coordination. We've seen a few of these large projects that have a lot of hand-holding that go into them. They might be like an Oregon Consensus or Oregon Solutions type project, or some new, novel development. If those happen on the ocean shore, they really probably won't very much. But when you see projects that come around, some of these have so many agencies, so many layers, that we're just expected to go to meeting after meeting after meeting for years on end. And so being able to actually kind of have a recapture clause for that of, hey, we'll let you know on some of these bigger ones if we need a higher fee. But I don't anticipate us using that very often. And then clarifying that fees are related to each landowner, and that just ties back to early on rules that basically say it's one application for each property, because our agreement is with the landowner, not with, yes, 4 or 5 people might come together on a single project, but as far as responsible party goes, we need to be able to say you're a responsible party on your property, and your neighbor's a responsible party on theirs, not some neighbor decided to be the responsible party for all 5, because they don't necessarily have that legal connection under a definition of the responsible party. Application, this is again, we talked about previously, like if there's an enforcement action, you get kind of a tier bump, if it's related, or if it's effectively subject to enforcement action related to the work that's in there. And then unless it's resolved prior. So this is again a little bit of that carrot and stick that, like, we've had several times where we have an unresolved violation, and we'll get effectively another application to do something different on the same property. And so just being able to kind of have that, again, an incentive to resolve a violation before we look at a permit. And then some clarifiers in here for annual fees. And that goes for, there are occasions which we might issue a multi-year permit. Most of our permits we're going to be limiting to a year, but again, we want to have that flexibility and have it clarified for what our fees are. So those are kind of the little bit of clerical, and then some additional fees that I have outlined in here. One is going to be if we get an official request for somebody to ask us whether or not they need a permit. And that takes a review. Sometimes those can be pretty simple, sometimes they can be pretty complicated. But there is time and energy involved in reviewing those applications and making that determination. And then 11, it relates to, I'm going to call it the serial resubmission. While it doesn't happen a lot, most of our applicants, we basically we'll get an application, we'll send them back an incomplete letter that says, hey, here's what's wrong, and they'll work on that and resolve it. We have had a couple different times. We've got one working on right now where, you know, it's going on, I'll just say it's approaching 10 resubmissions, where we're looking at it each time, and each time it's several hours to look through to try to figure out, well, what did you actually change, and finding out that really they didn't change anything, they just resubmitted it. And so we need to be able to recoup that cost when those happen. Felicia.
Yeah, I had a question for number 10, actually. It was not really clear to me. So basically, it's like a request to know, like to ask, do I need a state permit or not? Or is there something already ongoing and they're like, I don't need a state permit? Because the last sentence was a little confusing to me, saying like, if during application review, the department determines that no permit is required, the amount above this fee range would be returned to the applicants. So that part was a little confusing for me.
Yeah, so the intent behind that is, you know, basically we'll have kind of two different situations that might happen. One is somebody says, OPRD, I want you to tell me that this project will not have a permit. Well, again, we have to review it with do the background to be like, okay, we're going to actually put that in writing, that's statement. The other time is somebody could submit an application, and let's just say they end up submitting a $5,000 application fee because we're planning on putting out to public review, we're doing all that. But we get into our that completeness review and we're like, this project is not on the ocean shore, or this project doesn't need a permit. I don't know why they submitted this, whatever that's, you know, whatever that framework is, we would return the money over this this base request, even though they didn't ask for it as a base request. If it's clear that they didn't need a permit, again, we're basically giving them the money that we would have spent on drafting the permit, doing the public review, running it through management, DOJ, whatever that takes. That's not happening because we're giving them that
Okay,
kind of
thanks.
early out. Does that clarify it? And if so, I mean, if not, I'd like to make sure I have the better language in there if that's confusing.
Just for me, I didn't realize it was, you know, based on the way you explain it is like there is different like case scenario, and that's why I was not sure. Maybe in my help, like explaining in which cases this can apply, because at first I was confused. Do they ask for that in the first place, having like a no state permit, or they are, like you just explained, they have an ongoing application and paid more, and then either they are the one asking, so like, oh, we made a mistake, we don't need a state permit, or you're the one realizing like, hey, you don't need one. So I feel like there are multiple scenarios there, but maybe it might be helpful to explain those.
Okay, thank you. Cameron.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
You were talking a little bit before about applicants who just resubmit and take up everybody's time by doing that. Does the department not have the power in rules to limit the number of applications? It's common in land use law and local ordinances, you see it everywhere, that if an application has been denied, there's a certain period of time after which they cannot reapply for the same project. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes a year. But to avoid this exact kind of problem and loss of time and expertise and raising of general exasperation levels, when someone just reapplies and reapplies, if you don't already have that power in rules, can it be placed in this set of rules?
So you're talking about if something was actually denied?
Yeah, if it was, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know what kind of situations Parks gets into, but either if it was denied or if they keep resubmitting something with minor or no changes that aren't getting anywhere. I mean, there's got to be some way in rules to limit that and the drain on taxpayer time and money that it causes.
Hadn't thought about putting a cap on it, but is an interesting concept. The intent behind where I was going here was, like I said, is you can keep resubmitting. It's just going to cost you once you get past the 2, it's going to cost you each time you do that. So we're recouping our costs, which will to some extent, I think, help that, because a lot of times what we're seeing is it's, in particular in our current scenario, it's contractors that will, they're basically spending their clients' money. And I think when there's no cost to resubmit, there's no cost necessarily getting passed back to the client. But when it's like, hey, I need another, $500 to resubmit this, and it's like, wait, you've asked me for $500, multiple times now. What's going on here? Why do you keep asking me for this money? I mean, it starts hopefully on that end it self corrects.
Yeah,
but having
I think it does. I mean, clearly it will help, but it seems to me it's kind of a slightly blunt tool for dealing with the problem, that it would be better to have straight up language saying you can apply twice, and you after that you can't apply again for a year, whether we've denied you or not. Just like make it cold stop so you don't get a merry-go-round even with additional fees. I just, since it's common in land use law for there to be such a provision, I'm kind of surprised Parks doesn't have one. I realize this isn't land use, but it's close enough. It's, situations with applications on the ground where this can happen.
It's an interesting concept that we have not talked about internally. So I have a note of that. Thank you. Megan.
Yeah, I was wondering about, you said that each landowner has to have their own application and permit fees and everything. What about when it comes to maintenance of a larger project, like a nature-based or non-structural solution? Maintenance is required, and to get every landowner then on board to file their applications at the same time in order to maintain that piece of, that piece of structure or non-structural solution seems difficult if it's many different landowners. And then that would also hamper them from maintaining it. So is there a way to, I don't know what the solution is, but is there a way to have a catch for that?
There could be. We have a similar situation right now with dune management, because it's that same issue where we've got multiple landowners and they have to manage by a unit. And we have situations where not all the landowners are on board with doing the work again. Now I'll say some people do find that as an elective activity, where if you put out something like nature-based wouldn't mean really as elective, we'd probably have some conditions that would be requiring that long-term, maintenance and management. So, but that is a really good point, Megan. I think both from the how do we all apply at one time, but also how do we set that up so that that long-term maintenance is being met. Sorry, I just want to make another note here real quick. Go ahead. Diane, I think you had your hand up next.
A couple things. So I'm in support of Cameron's suggestion. I feel like some homeowners will not notice $500 here and there, and they'll think it's customary. And there will also be, you know, vendors who will say, well, you know, PRD, this is just, you know, what you have. So I think it's much cleaner and more straightforward and proactive to lay it out ahead of time, as Cameron was suggesting. And then to follow up, my question was kind of what Megan just brought up as I'm looking through like the annual fees, and there's this reference of 5 years, and I don't know exactly what number 9 is envisioning and why that 5 years is there, but and then I jumped down to, the transfer of modifications. And I'm just wondering, as Megan touched on, how do you make sure that if there has been a sale or even not, that that the conditions of approval on a structure or an alteration are honored and go live with the expected lifespan of the operation. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so as a reminder, there is a section related to renewals, and this part is just for the fees. And so there was a section that we've looked at previously related to kind of to that, and basically within that, they would have to do a permit transfer. There's some validation and verifications that we would do, those kinds of things. So within those procedural pieces, this was just related to the fees.
So just related to the fees, I buy the house. Somewhere in that transaction, in the escrow documents, I'm going to know that I'm on the hook for annual fees.
So the annual fee would only be for a permit that I would say has ongoing construction. And so those are going to be fairly limited. And honestly, since we've been here, Tyler helped me. I think Tyler's still on. Have we issued or had a project that has had multiple? I mean, we had some that have extended. Oh, they've been extended and they've gone into multiple years for like a riprap project. I think it was.
Yeah,
there you go.
It's a little bit it's a little bit complicated on those though, because those were like adjoining properties where the revetment was built like one lot at the time. And yeah, like where it extended into like a year and a half. But as far as like the dune grading permits, like Tillamook County, for example, will issue you a view grading permit for 5 years. Your fording grading permit's good for 5 years, and that's how most of the fording management plans are written. I think the same as for Bayshore down in Lincoln County too. So,
and so
that could be another example.
You're gonna collect those fees up front for the 5 years?
If we're going to issue for 5 years. And I think that's and that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier. I'm not 100% sure where we're seeing this one laying out, but we also don't want to be silent to it. So it's that, again, it's going to be up to, we may issue, but again, I can't think of really anything, because honestly, like even the view grading, Tyler and I've talked about this a lot, is that we probably wouldn't issue for multiple years, because really what you're applying for is to do the one grading event and take it down to a specific elevation. Now, if that was going to take you a couple years to do, like you propose, hey, we're going to do, a little bit here, one section here, one section here, one section here, and it's going to take me 2 years to get to that because of other constraints. Yeah, I could see us issuing a multi-year permit, but it's going to be to just take it to that elevation and that profile of which you propose. So that's where some of these, it's maybe a little hypothetical, but at the same time, we don't want to tie our hands to where then we get to, it's like, well, we only issue 1-year permits, which is what we had in one of our early drafts. And Tyler and I talked that through and just said, gosh, that it artificially it artificially restricts what we can do. And so being able to have that flexibility, but at the same time, we don't want to be going past 5 years, because really, if the ocean changes so much in that time period, that we need to be able to handle that.
I think another maybe more reasonable example beyond the Fortune management plan permits are access. A lot of times we'll get like local jurisdictions or whatever that want to place sand over a public access way, or community access where they want to, dump some sand to make their, egress down to the beach or whatever a little bit smoother. Where we could condition a permit to be like 2, 3, 4, 5 years for that, while maybe they look for a long-term solution like building a staircase or something. I could see us using an annual fee for something like that potentially, where it's like, hey, we just check to make sure you're in compliance, and yeah, we kind of renew your sand placement or something like that. Diana, does that kind of answer your question a little bit?
It does. I mean, I like that you guys are saying if it's 5 years, you're going to collect the fee. That just seems cleaner to just take care of it all at once. But I leave it to you guys. I just was having trouble trying to imagine what was being done that you were issuing the 5-year permit for, and then also like how you would make sure that you're able to collect if there is a transfer of property during those 5 years. I don't see that addressed. So.
Yeah, and I mean, not to go too far off track here, but I mean, I think the next question is what if they don't pay?
Yeah, right.
Kev, what if they don't pay and you've already issued them a permit? Diana, I think that kind of
right
supplements your question a little bit too, of like, well, now do we have an enforcement action because they won't pay and re-up their permit? Or, it could just be cleaner to not do that. So,
well, and I think the way it really sets up, Tyler, and the way this is written is that when you're doing if there is an annual permit fee, they have to pay it before we basically say, yes, you're renewed for another year. And so if not, then you're not renewed, so you don't have a permit. So then, yeah, if they go out and do more, it's going to be a violation. But I think, Dana, to your term, I think part of what we're looking at, and this is going to be more on the administration side of things, but is making sure that there are not only attestations, but things like that. Some of these things that are meaningful get moved over into the deed declarations. So instead of it just being a reference to your permit that, hey, there was a permit issued for this at this location, and here's a permit number, but to actually have some language that gets put into that where it's like, you're responsible for maintaining it. It's only good, this is the only time period in which it is, whatever that is. If the land ownership changes, you have to let us know. Having some of those kind of higher level that would be appropriate to have in a declaration, as some of the conditions that we have in our permits, they would not be appropriate to have in some sort of deed declaration, but that long-term responsibility, making sure those get pulled over. So hopefully administratively, that stuff will come about as we roll out the new rules.
Okay, thank you.
So Kevin,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
Sorry. So Kevin, I'm just thinking that maybe we reframe 9 as like a renewal fee instead of maybe an annual fee.
Okay.
That's all I got. Go ahead, Cameron.
Well, I didn't have anything else. Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
Okay.
My apologies.
No worries.
That does seem to make it clearer that, there is a process and of review rather than just, go to town for these 5 years, you're good. You're good to go. So
okay.
I like that as well.
Okay. So moving down, we were at 13 here. Variance fee. This one I'm struggling with. I may end up rolling it back up into modification. This is something we had related to, again, this is a copy and paste from DSL that, and since we're gonna be bringing things like in-water work periods and that into our rules, having having a fee built in for having that dialogue and coordinating that that change. That's what that placeholder is for. So and then a couple of 14 and 15 here, or 14 was put in here. This is kind of it was something that was added that apparently is something we've seen internally and is relatively common out there, where people will pay fees by credit card, and then since we're moving more that direction, and then they will actually dispute the credit card charges. But you will get an approval notice. We'll get that notice because if we're not connected, I can't see what anybody's paid or not. And then they'll basically, then it'll disappear. And so part of that is this was put in there basically to be like, hey, if that happens, we understand it, but we're going to notify you, and you've got a certain amount of time. Otherwise, it's going to kick you back out. So just because you submitted at the same time, you pulled it away, it's as though you didn't submit it, basically. And then 15 is related specifically to emergency. I'm probably going to move that to the emergency sections. I kept it here because it was talking about fees and how does it go in, but effectively it's just saying that, hey, once you, if you have an emergency, your fee is due within 45 days of getting the authorization. And that's partly because we're working on a scenario if it's truly an emergency, you need to be getting out there, and you might not be able to get to a bank. We could have a discussion on that. Is that 45 days too long? Is it short? Especially with credit cards and online payments now. But again, I'm using this from a model from DSL's language because I thought it was reasonable. Charlie, go for it.
Yeah, it just seems that if we're able to mobilize on an emergency with construction equipment and other things, then we should be able to mobilize on payment as well. So I would recommend that be a pretty short timeline. They're asking for an emergency, and so I think that maybe it's not the full expectation, but at least some good faith up front is important in a timely matter. I mean, honestly, I think we should discourage emergencies, but they happen.
Any thoughts on what that time period should be? And this is to anybody in the group.
I tend to think if you're going to be making major modifications immediately of the ocean shore, then it should be upon groundbreaking. But that's my personal, probably overzealous opinion.
I mean, it takes like 4 days to move money from one bank to another bank, usually. So I don't know, like if you do an online transfer kind of thing. So seems like it shouldn't be maybe like 5 days or something. I don't know. Just a thought.
Hey, Kevin, I got an example from this year or this past year that might be helpful.
Go for it.
So we have 2 provisions for emergency permits. One is we can give a verbal authorization. Another is then we reduce it to writing, or we just go with the writing to start with, which is definitely preferred. We had a situation in Lincoln County this past year where we pretty much withheld the written authorization until they they paid. You know, so I'm leaning towards what Charlie said.
Okay.
As far as like, you know, I think we can all agree that like urgent situations can happen where, yeah, okay, we need to go ahead and give you that verbal approval. But then I think that by the time the department has time to sit down and write something and they have time to submit like a formalized application, that really that payment needs to come pretty quickly on the heels of all that coming together. But I'm certainly open to other ideas.
Okay.
So
John?
how many days would that be?
Sorry, Diana, go ahead and finish up.
Oh, I was just wondering, so Tyler, how many days are you thinking? How many days would that be?
Um, I think I'm with Charlie. I think 0 days. Like, I mean, I would say that we need to mirror. Right now, our rule says within 10 days, we have to reduce a verbal authorization to writing. And so I would expect the same out of the applicant, that by the time they have time to actually formalize their request in writing. Once they go ahead and submit that in, that the fee should accompany that. Not 45 days. I think
Yeah.
that's
That sounds reasonable to me as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to throw onto that, Kevin. I agree with Tyler, Charlie, and Diana. It doesn't seem. I can't think of a situation where you're going to have a problem with that. I mean, if they're ready to move equipment, you're ready to issue a written authorization. Yeah, payment on demand seems pretty straightforward.
Okay. Sorry, I need to rewrite some notes. I just hit the wrong button and deleted them.
It looks like we have about an hour left. Do we want to take a 5-10 minute break before we move forward?
Yeah, this would be a perfect time to take a break.
Okay, let's plan on coming back at 3:05.
Thank you, Katie.
Okay, thanks. Okay, it looks like we're at 3:05. But I think I didn't hear you, Kevin.
Here we go. Sorry.
Okay.
If everybody could just raise their hand, we'll do a quick head count, make sure everybody's back from break. Looks like we still got a couple. Cameron, Charlie, Jackie, if you guys are back, please raise your hand. Just want to make sure everybody's here before we jump into the next. Give another minute or so.
I bet you can go ahead and get started and then they'll join us
right.
as soon as they can.
We can do
back
that.
on.
All right, we'll do that. Okay. You guys can put down your hands now. Thanks. All right, so this last little section of the fees is kind of its own little standalone piece. It is a section that does exist in rules currently. It is not been really readily used, except for pipeline and cables. But part of that is just kind of the whole context of where it sits and making sure we're pulling it out. And so by moving things around into this format and kind of combining them, because right now they are split out into two different topics within the rule, and not really kind of within the fee, is this just compensation. There's two parts that specifically call out, and that is, as I mentioned previously, pipeline cables, conduits, and natural product removal. It is kind of the same type. It could also be applied to other uses that might occupy the ocean shore or something. Didn't necessarily write the rule to be that kind of extend it, but also didn't preclude it. So, but really trying to tie it back to those two categories, and then laying it out what that means. I will say, at least at this time, I don't think the agency, we don't have the bandwidth or interest in going through and really defining exactly what a just compensation would fee be and how it's calculated that could be applied across, partly because they just don't get used very often. So what I have done, again, building on pulling this together, is to define that this is what we could charge for just compensation fee. Currently, we have been kind of in lieu of an application fee. We've been, for these cables and conduits, we've been using somebody at some point in time came up with a $10,000 number. I use kind of that as a starting point, as if we did a flat fee. And remember, this would be in addition to an application fee, or we have these other factors here that can play into it for our consideration. And so it's really looking at it that one of these four scenarios we're going to be putting in play. This fee rate per measure definitely would be something more like if somebody was doing mineral extraction or something of that nature. But it's also I don't remember. I think it might have been one of you that mentioned something previously, was, when we look at like fiber optic cables and some of these types of things, maybe there's some value on how much it actually can, whatever its capacity is, or what sort of commercial value comes from that could be put into play. And again, I think that would come out in some either project specific review where we would have some justification for asking that, or some future rulemaking to clarify that specifically for those activities. But wanted to basically frame it out a little bit better than what we have. And how I did that was took the framework that we had in one section, and it also said, okay, when we're creating this rate, these are some of the other things that we can look at. And some of these do overlap a little bit with mitigation. And that's where this just compensation is kind of going to be a weird and it always has been a weird fee. But basically trying to put it back to where we can look at as we're looking at these projects and what impacts they have, how they're going to relate to the ocean shore, that those are some of the things that we can look at for that compensation. And again, these are primarily going to be applied for, I would say, commercial endeavors in most cases. Don't know what else I can say on that. I'd love to have any feedback or thoughts. Felicia, go ahead.
Yeah, just for maybe clarity, what for like number 2A and B, instead of maybe saying a flat fee of not less than $10,000, maybe it would be more clear if you say a flat fee of $10,000 or more.
Oh.
Is it because yeah, otherwise I think if you're really quick, you may just think it's going to be 10,000 or less. I mean, it can be a mistake, but I think it's more clear to say 10,000 or more. If it's the minimum, it's going to be 10,000.
Great. John?
Yeah. So beyond the $10,000, how often do you charge? How often has OPRD been able to charge more than $10,000? Has that happened?
Not that I know of, and like I said, I think it's been one of those where somebody at some point in time just said, "Hey, for cable landings, we charge $10,000," and that became the application fee as well. So it was just like I said, it wasn't in addition to us reviewing it. It was just 10 grand, which going
Yikes.
back and looking at some of these projects, it's like, wow, we lost a lot of money when you start looking at the complexity. Like I said, that last Amazon one, we probably spent 50 to 70,000 over 2.5 years working on that thing. I'm just thinking of all of our staff that were involved in all the meetings that we went to. And those of you who are involved in that Amazon or watched it, there was a lot of moving parts. And like I said, we were having, hour-long meetings every week for a while. And it was 2, 3, 4 staff in them. I mean, anyways.
Yeah, that hurts. I guess my thought was, it's kind of a big question. I would think that one way to have the applicant tell you what they think the the amount should be is to start with a very large amount. Say you can just, if you don't want to figure this out, start with this amount. If you want to narrow it down to something a little bit more precise, why don't you start working through this methodology, and then you have to start providing us information about your project that helps you tell us what the right amount should be. So, I mean, I would even say take those amounts and scale them to these tiers. So if you are actually looking at a tier 1 project, maybe that amount is closer to $10,000 or less. I don't know. Or maybe you start at a tier 2. Maybe a tier 1 doesn't even trigger that amount initially. But if you get to, say, let's say a tier 7, I would say you could start at $1 million and then start giving them some criteria. And if, hey, you want to donate $1 million to the state of Oregon, that sounds great. But if you don't, why don't you start providing us certain information? We'll start letting you whittle that number down to, and I would guess at a tier 7 project, you probably are looking at something in tens of thousands, if not $100,000 plus. Because if you're talking about what are your impacts to the ocean shore, what does that do to the public's utilization of the ocean shore? I mean, I think my numbers are a little wild because I don't actually know what kind of scales we're talking about, but if you take the concept and run with it, maybe you get something a little bit closer to what actually is the actual the cost to the public in terms of how much time are they taking away from the public by using the beach or the shore the way they are. And anyway, that's just kind of maybe just a random thought. I don't know if that helps or not.
So you're thinking using the factors in 3 to be kind of that that would be what they would use to their methodology to be able to come back and be like, yeah, really, we're not impacting all of these things, so really we should have
Right.
a lower fee.
Right.
That's an interesting concept. I said I just kind of used the existing rules and went, yeah, here's the hole we have, but I kind of you're taking the existing rule and you're kind of reversing it almost. That's an interesting.
I think it's incumbent on the applicant to tell you what they're doing, and I think that's a really great way of doing it. And if they don't want to share that much information, by the way, I think an ocean shore landing, like a cable landing, is a good example of that, because I know Facebook, Amazon, some of those other companies, they don't want to tell you what they're doing. They don't want to tell you where the cable's coming up exactly. They want to keep some stuff secret, and fine, you can do that, but you know, we don't know what you're actually costing the public because you're not telling us this information. So we're going to assume it's going to be a lot. And now I'm just telling you, I know there could be a whole bunch of barbed wire in that concept. I don't know if that would actually fly. And you're talking about some big numbers, maybe with some of these larger companies, but I also happen to think that, this is really them coming to the state saying, hey, we're parking our equipment on your shore. I think they should be the ones to work through this process and tell the state what they think the fee is, and then you test their results and see if the test matches up with what they're saying. That's how I would approach it. But yeah, I guess that's my thought process there.
Charlie, go ahead.
Oh man, John's question and suggestion there just kind of threw me for a loop.
I'm with you.
I'm like really, I like out of the box thinking that's different. I have varied emotions that I need to process on that. I guess I don't have a lot of experience with just compensation, but I guess I feel like there's what is expected and unexpected in this place that I'm kind of confused by. And if this is an expectation up front, everything that's listed here are things that you might expect to know. But until you do the project, you might not have realized what the actual impact was, or maybe there was an accident. So I'm kind of curious, like, how does that fit in and between what is known and what is not known about potential impacts for evaluating just compensation?
That's an interesting way to frame that one, Charlie. I guess the only thing I can say right now is, given that in the application, I mean, yes, currently we have kind of the framework that you have to tell us what your expected impacts are. We're going to be asking for more documentation from the applicant on those things up front. So hopefully these things, since this also kind of directly mirrors some of the mitigation discussion too, those things should be available in that assessment. But the whole unexpected piece is kind of an interesting one. I'm not really sure where to go with that.
I can think of a lot of times when things don't go as expected, and the impacts end up being much greater, and sometimes actually much less than expected, but oftentimes in the event of an accident. And I can think of, several cable landings that did not go as expected. And the cost was to many stakeholders, but in particular parks at the end of the day on those. And so, yeah, again, me not being fully clear on how just compensation typically works.
Well, I'm going to say I'm not either, because I literally was told to apply $10,000 because that's what we did previously. And that was what I did with Amazon, and we all went, this isn't right. So that's part of why I didn't really propose changing things, because I don't have a lot of context. But at the same time, I like some of the ideas, like John. I really kind of I like your idea, and I think, Charlie, that kind of also gets at yours too,
does.
which is like you start it in reverse of saying, we're going to expect this is going to be, this is going to be horrible because we know these things, happen, and every one of these projects has them. And then it's like, okay, we may consider things if sufficient safeguards are in place. But then even then, I'm not 100% that those safeguards are there, because I look at Amazon and we had a full drill bakage plan, a full inadvertent release plan. We had all these things that we went through up front, which was great because we actually defined those things. But then ultimately they broke a drill shaft and then came back and said, well, we just want to leave it, or we want to leave the it was the not the drill shaft, the lining that they used to keep from having collapses. And like, well, now we're going to leave this, we want to leave this on the ocean shore. And after we issued our permit, we found out some erosion issues that might have some long-term concerns and consequences at that site. And it's like, well, so would we have wanted to reduce that, or is that become the longer term? Like, we're gonna have to babysit this thing long term. And so that's kind of like where, John, I like your idea of kind of flipping that around. And I think it also could build into that dialogue of, I'll just say, abandonment and vacating those, just from a standpoint of when if a company goes bankrupt and walks away, that we have that compensation up front to deal with whatever future issues might happen on the ocean shore.
Yeah, I'm really glad Charlie brought up the after effects, because I hadn't thought about that, and that actually makes a lot of sense. And Amazon's, leaving some equipment, or leaving the casing on the bottom of the ocean, or whatever that was. That's a perfect example of, we didn't plan on that. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different scenarios. I mean, I think that's probably the thing I can't really explain in my head is, you're not going to have a roadmap for every single scenario, but you can have a menu of options to deal with them. And I think that can be something that the applicant proposes their own menu of options. The state can evaluate that menu and come back and say, we're going to take this, or we're going to modify it. And if you agree to it, we'll take this. And then basically that just leaves, I don't want to call them penalties. I just want to call them, I don't know what to call them. Their opportunity costs is what they are. Basically, if the applicant gets in a bind and they have to leave some equipment under the ground or something like that, it's like, look, we can't fix this. So here's that bucket of money we set aside for this little problem, and you go ahead and keep that. And maybe, again, this can go a lot of different ways, but I really think that when you, I don't know that the just compensation concept ever had I don't know if it was ever laid out in legislation. I don't know who thought it up originally, but the word that comes to mind is rent. I mean, I know it's a little tacky, but it's actually the word I think of when I think of just compensation. It's like, look, you're using a public asset, you're going to pay rent for that. And
it's almost an ad valorem is kind of the
the
other way to look at it. Yeah, I think that's kind of what they had, because it was under the natural product removals. But yeah, it's a weird. I wish there was more clarity in it.
I also wish I knew what it was meant for, because if it's meant to do something like improve parks function on the beach, or if it's meant to create value where value has been taken away, I'm a big fan of understanding the nexus between, we're taking this money from you for a reason. Here's what it's going towards. This is why we're doing it. That would help me too. But in any event, when people leave stuff out after they're done because they couldn't retrieve it or something like that, they should pay for that. That's like, there should be like a cost for that. So I agree with Charlie 100%. There's probably other scenarios that are comparable, but 100%.
Well, and just kind of throwing it out for the benefit of the group, this is what we get in statute, is this first part, and it's basically the just compensation is here at the second line, but it's effectively upon payment of just compensation by the permittee. What does that mean, right? I mean, that's it's like, well, statute obviously had some meaning for it, but yeah, and then the same thing, and then same thing down under these natural products. It's on the payment of just compensation as provided under adopted under rule subsection 4. It's like, okay, well, what does this mean? Um, so yeah, I'm not 100% sure, other than I think that it was intended to be that, yeah, they're by doing that, it's not in support of the public, use, public interest, protect preservation, that type of stuff. So there is, like you said, John, a rent or a so that's why I say this is kind of a mitigation too. It's weird, but it's specifically called out in those sections, and so we have to have it as a concept in here, and I think that's why I'm really appreciating this discussion. Charlie, go for it.
I'm still haven't thought completely through John's suggestion, but what makes me nervous a little bit is this idea that we would pay to mitigate the impacts that we otherwise would disallow. And so I wouldn't want this to be a loophole to be like, well, if we have enough money, we can pay over these potential impacts. Like the definition of sort of mitigation in that sense.
Yeah, that's a good point, because
Like if
this
you're
doesn't
asking the
have.
applicant, I mean, naturally they're going to go to the most optimistic outcome, but if they have enough money, why not just pay for it all? And so it feels like there needs to be some boundaries around like what our law provides here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree
I'm
with that.
still struggling to understand how this works. And I need to think about it more outside of the meeting, I think.
Feel free, and we can always come back to this one later on too. And I'm going to do some thinking, because that the dialogue Charlie and John have brought up is getting me thinking more about how does this relate to mitigation. And currently, there is no real strong connection back to, other than I think I say it's somewhere like in addition to mitigation. But maybe they need to be more married within that, and that just compensation is rolled into as a part of the mitigation. So it's like, hey, you're going to have a fee based on whatever you occupy or utilize or take out of the public's trust, in addition to the impacts of the project, and maybe turn it more around that way, since we are building more of that mitigation framework. So maybe there is a way to look at it a little differently. Okay. Any other thoughts on just compensation? Wonderful topic. Okay, well, that is it for fees. So now I'm going to switch over, and I'm going to kind of run through, let's see, how much time do we have left? We got a half hour. Okay. I want to use this last half hour to kind of go through and do a quick and kind of dirty review of the general authorization and project specific requirements. And so again, this is a repeat of what we saw earlier. I'm not going to really explain this one again. The way mentally, this is the best way I could kind of show it graphically to explain what was going on in my head as I was trying to figure out how to frame all of this up. Basically looking at it as a series of umbrellas, and this first one obviously is all of our alteration rules, right? It's the beach bill in general, and it has review standards, other things, and that covers the entire program. Well, legislatively, we have the ability to create general authorizations, and so that kind of is a subset of those trickles down into here, right? As long as it meets the standards that that fit within the general authorizations. And if we're dealing with a project specific, and in this case, we're talking access today, that's what I was using, the document I sent as the example, is a certain amount of these projects fit within that access category, right? And so we could just say, hey, we're going to pull out all access projects and mix and match it all up here under this main umbrella. We could do that. What was happening though is it was getting really mixed and mashed within that, as I kind of explained previously. So by pulling out access and by pulling out or I should say project specific like access and pulling out the general authorizations, it helps kind of filter that down a little bit. And then within access, there is a subset of those that meet the requirements and the standards that are outlined in the statute for us to create general authorizations. So we get this access general authorization, which is a smaller subset, kind of builds off both the activity criteria that we've developed, but also off of the rules specifically for general authorizations. And then within that access, there's a subset that we can do where we wouldn't actually send them out for any sort of notice. Or kind of currently we would refer to them as things that we would waive the permit requirements. So basically the public's not really seeing these, but the way we're doing it now is by rule, we would adopt these with specific conditions, whatnot, to say, hey, these are simple and small things. We're basically just kind of pushing these through, and they're relatively simple, relatively quick, relatively benign, or beneficial to the ocean shore. So this is kind of that tiering framework that I've been building off of. And so what that resulted in was the structure, and I sent these out to you for our general authorization. And just because we have a half hour, I'm not going to go through this line by line. We can definitely, you guys take a look at it as we go forward. But really, the general authorization rules, I'm going to say, are really more an administrative piece. They're identifying that we have, I'm going back to this one, we have the kind of criteria, how we establish them and what they apply to, how they work together, those kind of things. So a lot of that stuff's framed out. Same thing with the fees. So it's, again, mostly administrative. And then things like the elements down here really frame it up into what's being required to be given to us, what we do with that information. So effectively, it's a smaller application process. And so what is in their application requirements, and scroll down here to like our review, and I'm just using 10 as an example here. It's telling us, hey, within 45 days, we're going to look at, and we're going to basically let them know that it's complete and eligible for a general authorization, and we're going to give these specific determinations, right? And so we're basically going to be giving them what information they need to know to move forward. And then once we have made a determination that it's complete, then this is where the proposal that I've put out is, within that 45 days, we have to make a decision and they have to have a final determination from us. But once we've actually kind of determined that it's complete and it's eligible, we're going to send out effectively a notice to the local land use department and our other agencies, as well as the interested bodies that are on our kind of standard mailing list, just basically saying, hey, we're making this determination, and it's our preliminary determination. You have 14 days to come back and basically tell us why you think it's not eligible or why it should not be issued as a general authorization. So it's kind of it's basically a pre-project or pre-decision notification. It's modeled a little bit after some of the land use, where it's a notice of decision, and then there's an appeal period. But we wanted to kind of make it a little more similar to, I'll say, kind of the normal general authorization process that has been used by DSL in the past, which was they would do a completeness, you'd have a review period, and then you would make a permit decision after that. It's building off of that, but kind of putting it toward the end. So it's really more of, hey, we've already made the decision. We've looked at this. We're basically just asking whether or not you agree with it. And then if we get comments, then we will take that into consideration with our final decision. So that's kind of the way we're looking at approaching that. And the nice thing about that is it allows us to focus more on that application up front and making that determination, making that decision. And then procedurally, we're kind of moving on to the next step and assuming most of these will go through, it just effectively automatically gets issued at the end of that time period versus having to pick it back up, review it all, and then write everything up, then send it back out again. So it's kind of trying to administratively make these a little bit smoother for us on our end. And then, so I just kind of, like I said, wanted to kind of share that with you. That's kind of the process we're looking at. And then we would have a subset of projects that we could basically call out that are not going out for that 14-day public review period. And then the rest of the topics, again, are going to be things like the how long is it valid for, that it's subject to the same enforcement processes as in Division 80, what the appeal process is, which I have it limited to basically those that are the applicant or those that actually responded to the notice. So trying to limit that down. So that's kind of that overall concept for the general authorization. And I'm willing to go through any of these pieces, and the plan will be to look at them more detailed next time. But yeah, I just kind of want to share that framework because it's important to then look at it under how does this fit within the umbrella of the access the access umbrellas. And so going back, what I just shared with you was kind of these rules over here, right? So that's how did we establish them? What are they? Now what I'm doing is moving over, kind of looking at this set of 3 umbrellas. The first one will be this first one, and then the second one will be these 2. And the way that's framed up for access is we would have some new definitions. And so with these, we'd have public access way, community access way, and private access way. And that originally I had a couple different definitions, but really trying to tie it back to what is the form and function of what we see related to access. And obviously public access ways have a more inherent connection to the ocean shore. Community access ways, trying to find that balance of, there are some areas where public access ways just don't exist, and or privately owned or managed access ways would have a value to the community that they're being served by. And like in this case, we had it was more than 4 dwelling units or more than four lodging units for hotels and that. And then the private is really going to be these kind of, I'll call them the single landowner is the most case what it's going to be sitting with, but that's where the 4 or fewer dwelling units or lodgings. And that's part of this, is to try to address this question that comes up where it's, well, I just want to have my personal stairway down onto the beach, and I want to have this specifically, even though right next door there might be a trail that goes right down to the ocean, I want to have my own in my backyard. And we've all seen it out there. These private access ways, there's some areas where there's just dozens of them in a small area, and a lot of them tend to have quite a bit of problems with them, both from a compliance and enforcement, but also a public safety standard. And so that's why we tried to kind of pull these apart. And then we do need to work on this dwelling unit. This is a placeholder, and you'll actually see I have habitable structure in these rules. And I understand that I'm using 2 different terms, but that's because it was a last minute change, and I haven't had a chance to go back through and do all the edits. But again, just trying to show you this construct is basically going down through these is you'd have this purpose and introduction. it really sets it up. This is covering anything. This is what an access way basically is. And it's to preserve the right of the public to access while protecting. So it's that, how do we, again, that balance question that we've had before. Eligibility, this is where the rubber kind of meets the road. And this is where I'm going to be looking for feedback from this group. And we may not have the time to do these, walk through each of these individually. What we may need to do at our as these start getting developed is kind of have more feedback on, okay, are we good with the access criteria, or are there sections that we want to jump into? So as I develop these, as long as today I'm looking for that kind of concept verification. If this works, we're going to need to take a deeper look at these along the way. So what I've been doing, and remember, this is that first umbrella. So this relates to all access ways. So going down through this, having an eligibility, and you'll notice that this first area relates to all access ways. It's maintenance and repair. It's so long as it meets the definitions. This is reiterating statute that effectively allows you to do maintenance and repair of work that either was grandfathered in, so pre-67, or that's been authorized. And then and having those things framed out to where we can replace or authorize access ways as long as they're consistent. So this is kind of I'll say an after the fact permits, probably the best way to put that is, we do know that some of these structures that are out there don't have permits. And we had kind of two different ways we could go. One is to say, just prohibit them outright and make people remove them, but that becomes a significant staff workload. The other is to have there's no record of this. It looks like it might actually meet the requirements. If you want to put in, a request, we could look at authorizing that. So again, it's that kind of circular discussion of, do you just say everything that's out there that exists is grandfathered in, or do you say, hey, under certain circumstances, we'll consider approving that? Gives us a way to move forward. And then removal. And then again, kind of going down through this framework. Then you have for public access ways, same thing, where now this is a more broad category. You can do several different additional activities. Same thing for community access is a little bit more narrowed. And then for private access ways, it's even more restricted and narrowed. And again, part of this is things like, looking at, I'm looking down here in C. And so this is for new structure, new private access structures, actually putting some limits on it. Well, we're not, if you're within a mile, or, if there isn't a public access within a mile of you, then we'll consider, private access. Or you have to have that community access connection. Is if a community access can be built, then that's what needs to be pursued, not just, well, I haven't talked to my community, I want my own. And then also keeping it, if you are authorized, that these can't be going more than, and I just came this up again, some of the standards in here, we can have a discussion of like the 15 cubic yards, but extending not more than 5 feet onto the ocean shore. Part of it is we want to be able to not encourage, but if people want a private access, keep it off the ocean shore, as long as you can get your local planning approval, keep it off the ocean shore. But if you need to, because of the site constraints, we'll consider a minimum amount. And that 5 feet seemed to be measurable and reasonable. Again, it's a starting point for our dialogue. And so that's kind of this eligibility structure and that of the rule, and then having the ineligibility going through and specifically calling out certain things, like in this case, a fee. If it's going to be a fee access other than for a public entity, then that's not consistent with the regulations. I have a placeholder in here related to the standard of, like, if it's confusing to the public or prevents escape. That's been one of the feedbacks we've had, just in some dialogue related to like tsunami evacuation and other things. Like, you get these areas that have a lot of stairways, which would be great, but they're all dead ends. There is some problem, I'll say, with that as far as long-term compliance enforcement, because you could come in and say, hey, I've got a permit request. Yeah, we're going to leave it. If people could come up and it just goes to our side yard, they could get out to our front yard, and then the next owner puts in a security fencing. So again, there's some problems with some of these, but again, they're placeholders. The intent is though is to kind of be like, hey, here's what isn't eligible. There's a connection to the general authorization, which I'll get to here in just a minute. Like I said, just doing a time check here quick. Then we'd have a set here where there's some additional application requirements. And so in this one, when it has a structure, there needs to be the geologic site report. And if you remember, that was part of an extension from our application requirements. And so the idea here is within these activities, we would specify kind of what the intent of those that report is, because obviously the content of a site hazard report for an access way is going to be different than for a 100-foot revetment or something. And so trying to get it back down to, what is it that we're looking for? What are the questions that we want answered? And then same thing with the engineering report, where it's like, hey, it actually has to have evidence from a professional engineer that basically it's built of good materials and sound design and will withstand the surf conditions that are out there, those kinds of things. So having those questions being answered. And then the review standards, again, some additional clarifications. So as you remember, we have some like the safety standards, those kinds of things. Well, some of these will build on to things primarily for the access. It's going to build on to those safety standards. It may also build into some of the other standards, like this last one of avoiding direct or indirect impacts on the ocean, on sensitive areas, and that includes even like the access, increasing the access to a sensitive area, right? So trying to kind of add that framework into there. And so this is how I'm taking those objective standards out of that first umbrella and trying to apply them to a project specific review. And then we'd have some specific conditions related. Some of these, the ones I have examples, probably will get moved to more general conditions. So, but the example here is if it's specifically related to access, we would have conditions in there. And so that's kind of that first umbrella, right? Of going back to my umbrella analogy. That's looking at this. So it's basically defining what fits in as an access. So it's more limited today. You could apply for any and all types of access. Under this framework, there is actually a narrower scope. It's not just the sky is the limit, apply for what you want to apply for and call it access. This tries to cover more of the types of projects that we would actually consider approving. And then this kind of tiered on to this. Oh, go ahead, Nancy.
Just a quick question. I was aware that you guys have a independent access rules advisory committee. Has any of their recommendations or information melded with this?
So that is being done through DLCD, and that's more about this will dovetail. We are working with them and have been on that, but the DLCD language is more about the county planning and prioritization and as it relates to identifying access and kind of identifying priorities and those kinds of things. Rhiannon, I don't know if you want to give a little bit more of a plug on that because you're closer to it than I am.
Yeah, I think you covered it pretty well. I think it's also keeping in mind that the counties are pretty strapped in terms of capacity and funding right now, and so they're walking a fine line between trying to encourage counties and cities to do updates for public access while also acknowledging that they can't mandate it at this time because of those capacity constraints.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And from what I've framed out here, for the most part, that rulemaking is primarily targeted at public access. And the private is kind of a secondary tier. And again, it's one of those where we're trying to kind of figure out what we see and how it fits in, and while supporting that public access, and hopefully overall making it easier to do public access and a little bit harder to do all these private access points. And so then underneath that umbrella, we have the general authorizations for access. And so kind of same framework is purpose and introduction, that effectively you're doing it without a full alteration permit, you're doing under those GAs. And this is where the framework then cuts down to, hey, again, public access ways under the GA, you can do up to 200 yards of material removal. You can do, kind of this basically cleaning of access ways, grading of access ways, those type of things. Oh, go ahead, Charlie.
Just a question.
Yeah.
How do we arrive at these numbers, like 200
So,
cubic yards,
so
the 50 cubic yards of clean sand, the 20 feet along? I'm sure some of
the
these have some strong rationale. I bet some of them, though, may have just
oh,
been
I'm going to say
ballpark.
they are educated ballparks, and that's why I said this is concept. So I would love to have feedback on, is it too much? Is it not? I have gone back and forth on some of these based on looking at some of the projects and knowing kind of what's out there. And these need to be tempered. And it's not in here, but you probably saw it earlier. I had a lot of comments like, is this the right volume to use? Is that, it's that, um, some of it is looking at, like, I'll just say sister agencies and some of the volumes they've used. 50 cubic yards is one of the standard ones that's been out there, is kind of a minimal threshold, but there are some other things where it's like, yeah, it's 50 would be a lot to do some of these things, and don't know that I'd want it under a category for something that's small, but yet by a public entity on a public access, maybe more than that is okay. But again, this is all up for debate. I would love to have feedback from this group on any of these values. And again, so as you're submitting your comments, please call those out. And if you think some of these numbers are way off.
Well, my immediate reaction is that this would all be very site specific. And what may be relevant at one site may not be as relevant at another site, particularly. I think if you ask the people that are doing this work, they probably want as much as they can. I'm aware of a lot of this work going on without really knowledge of how many yards or not, and no permits. And so it does seem like an area should be tightened up, both in the public and I would say municipal type education on maintenance. And but also on, like, do we want, and I know this sounds hairy, but do we want more site specific things? And I think particularly your proximity to a river mouth, a major road, the nature of the access, all of that stuff kind of matters. And so I don't, you're getting my gut reaction, not my thoughtful reaction. So,
and I appreciate that, Charlie, because that was, when looking at the statute, and it's, when you look at the three, because one of them is, and I'm not looking at it right now, but basically it's the relates to the restoration of the ocean shore, so it's much broader. And then you've got what is it, not more than minimal impacts. And so it's kind of this piece of, like, how do we balance that by trying to say, what under these GAs can we fit within those standards? And at the end of the day, go, this is defensible and realistic, and will actually move things forward. So for the group, what I've got highlighted on the screen is what the statute gives us for kind of the framework on what can be under general authorization. And so it's a pretty, some of these are terms currently in statute that have just been moved over to kind of help bolster the support that was currently in statute, or was previously in statute. And then we added on this, which is kind of this flexible, the temporary minimal impact, the ocean shore resources, which is more of that, hey, there's some things that may not fit into that first category that we want to cover, and that's where that no more than minimal. And like you said, Charlie, it is site specific. 200 yards in one place could be way not enough, and 200 yards in another place could be too much. And so, does that mean it's at the right spot because it fits the middle? I'm not sure. That's part of where I'm looking for some feedback as we refine these. But the intent behind what I was trying to get at was just, basically this is a thinner subset of that previous list, right? A lot of the language is similar, but it might actually have a cubic yard cap on it or some other cap, or a statement that it's only by a public body, those types of things. And then, again, having that for public access, community access, and private, and splitting that down, right? So, including things like this is a placeholder that we put on as kind of to try to deal with a situation that we have happens quite a bit. That is, the existing private accesses get damaged during a winter storm, and we get the ask of, hey, we want to fix this and we want to do things right. Well, technically it's an unpermitted structure. And so part of it, by like adding this into a general authorization, is allows them to do something quick and relatively easy to repair what was there. But it's also bringing in that acknowledgement that you see under at the end here, where basically it's like, hey, you need to have some sort of acknowledgement and probably document that through a deed declaration, so that this isn't permitted, and you guys are on notice effectively that that this is something that will need to be fixed. And yes, it's been fixed, but you're now on notice, and you're either going to have to get it permitted, you're going to have to remove it, you're going to, whatever that looks like. But it's that kind of a trigger for that discussion, instead of it just always resulting in an enforcement action and not having any way to move something forward. And again, it becomes a huge capacity issue, and especially as we move forward. And until we get littoral cell planning or some other things in place, we need a little bit of an out to be able to move through these things. And so, yeah, just kind of we're running out of time here. So just kind of to summarize that, then you come down into a smaller subset that has the no notice for 14 days. And then there's some specific section for access, general authorization, and application and conditions. We don't currently have anything that is for access. At least some of the other categories might have some additional GA specific conditions or application requirements, but for the most part, they're just going to be handled in the general ones that are spelled out under that umbrella for general authorizations, which is what this references back to. So my question for this group is, does this format make more sense to pursue in lieu of doing the more, I'll say, specific review standards or expansion on their review standards? Obviously, those still apply, and there still is a reference back to those standards that, hey, any activity still has to be consistent with the overarching program review standards. And if we found that something wasn't, we could kick it out for that. But in general, does this seem to make more sense to organize it this way? I guess that's the question, because we would have one of these for dune grading. I'm about 90% drafted on concept draft on that. We'd have one for erosion. I'm thinking, shoreline erosion maintenance, new shoreline erosion, and non-structural and new shoreline erosion structural. And I get a very simple breakdown, but kind of that type of thing. We'd have these categories set up for each of those activity types. I just want to get, again, this group's thought on, does this structure make more sense, and is it more applicable, or are we going down some dangerous category by trying to specify things too much? It's kind of, again, love to have your thoughts. Anybody?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It is a lot.
I like the framework that you got. A lot of, I don't know, the Cobra effect. There's just so many different possible outcomes. I don't know how that would play out. So, but yeah, it's a lot. But there's a lot. I mean, I'm just thinking of all the private access issues that I've seen in my time, and it's like, and they're horrible and horrifying too. Like the ropes over you know, you got a 25, 35 foot bluff and you got some rope dangling off of, you know, a tree, and that's how the property owner's been crawling up and down the bluff for years. I mean, you know, that was a real thing, right? So it's like that happens. And so you look at those types of issues and you're like, you know, that's got to stop. We got to come up with something better than that. And then they go and apply for a stairwell, and it's just like, oh, come on. And yeah, so yeah, I know. And but yeah, it's hurting cats, so I don't know how you do that.
Yeah. Well, and I
But
think the moral behind this one is like, and I'll just say in general, not that that rope is necessarily a great way, but if it's an existing path, they're using it, it's not on the ocean shore, okay, fine. But when they go to do a stairway, if they go, oh, well, now we're going to run that stairway onto the ocean shore, then we can come back and say, well, here's the parameters that you're going to have to fit under. And the big one is going to be, can you build it off the ocean shore? I mean, that's the first question, right? And which then now it becomes a local discussion, but it's at least that's our first question is, can you do that? Or at most, you know, we're only going to allow you to go 5 feet on to the ocean shore. And a lot of times that might get people to go, well, okay, now I understand, versus we've had some, I mean, you guys have seen them out there. We've got stuff that goes dozens of feet out onto the ocean shore, overhangs the ocean shore, and it's like this wood three or four story tall, like wraparound stairwell that is, yeah, it's like from a public safety standpoint, these things can be crazy. Felicia.
Yeah, I think I like the framework. I mean, it's true, it's going to be it's a lot of work for you, you know, to put that together. But on one side, I think it's like, you know, it's good to have that there, and you can always refer people there. And I think for me, at least it makes sense. I mean, it's helpful. What would be good to know, it's you mentioned that you're planning to do that for some, like, you know, for other things. Maybe might be good to share at the next meeting, like what do you think these are going to be, you know, like to have an idea of like what would be included under, you know, those different umbrellas, you know, and that would give us an idea of like how big it might get, and how much detail you're going to go into those. But I think so far it's been helpful to me.
Okay. Yeah, I think in a month I should be able to I'll probably have a couple more of these, at least in a concept form, and then again, we can probably have, if I don't have the rest of them done by the next time we meet, I can probably have a framework for some of those with maybe not all that details fleshed out, but at least saying, yeah, this is kind of what it would or would not cover. But yeah, okay. Diana, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if there's been discussion of no longer allowing private access. You know, like in your example of, well, if there's not a public within a mile, then they're allowed to do it. Well, wouldn't it be better if there was a public access that was put in? I just, again, like I'm unsure in this process of how much ability this process has for big changes, but you know, why do we have to allow private access? I think that should be looked at. And then if it does need to exist, then I think I would like to see really tightened up on what is allowable. I spoke with the planner of Shoreline, Washington, and we were talking about access, and she said that what they're coming up against, they started to have higher restrictions on stairways. And so people started putting in, you know, trams, personal elevators and trams. And she said that she really wished that they would have, you know, not allowed that because now she says, you know, it looks like Disneyland in certain points. And so if we have to do it, I think we should be really prescriptive in what is allowed and how minimal. And the reason that the trams were approved is because there was less impact on the shoreline, because it's only, you know, the landing spot and the takeoff spot. And I was trying to talk to the contractor who put them in, because I couldn't see a lot of examples online. I couldn't find examples of it. And they said this because they have to sign NDAs. So they don't have they can't show me much. They can show me the model in a couple of places, but I don't know. So that's my question for the group.
I would love to get feedback from this group on kind of any direction you think we should take on private access, because it's a little bit of a circular dialogue. Because if you prohibit it, then that creates problems because of what we have existing. With the hundreds, if not thousands, of stairways that, in particular, that we don't have really an inventory of, and from what we can tell, most of them are probably not permitted. And so, that leads to that problem. The other issue that we come up with is things like when we move to littoral cell planning or doing anything of that nature, it may be that, I'll just say certain areas, there's such a prevalence of them that only a couple more really wouldn't matter, and other areas where it should be an outright prohibition because, like, well, there aren't public accesses or private accesses, and it's really not conducive, and let's not get the expectation out there that you can have one. And so there's, I guess I'll say, multiple ways that you can think about how to approach that. And I'm not sure. I'm just trying to take it one step in that direction, but again, there's multiple ways to do it. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, can you throw this discussion for this in like the next meeting? Because I'm not only do I want to think about it, I actually want to go like talk to some people about that, because there's something in my head about something that has to do with the actual access, the legality of prohibiting private access to the beach and stuff like that. I mean, you probably know as much about those types of issues as I do, but I actually want to talk to some people I know that kind of actually know the law about it, like some of the case history and stuff. I'm kind of curious about it because if you can prohibit access, like I guess that's my question. It's more of curiosity. Is can you actually prohibit access in Oregon? I don't know if you can or you can't, but I think there may be at least a partial answer to that question, like in law. So
yeah, and I will say, like, and this is, you're seeing the concept run. All of this is still going to be subject to us working with our legal counsel and having that dialogue. And again, that's what part of why there is still an allowance for, but it's also going back to that framework of what is the least impact alternative. Well, if you have an alternative that, I'll say a quarter mile away, there's a public access, that's a reasonable alternative to walk. I mean, everybody else in your community, and if you were, just one row inland, you'd have to walk down to that. So that is an alternative that avoids impact of the ocean shore, right? And so but then when you get to these areas, and part of why we came up with that mile is, I mean, especially when you get to the South Coast and some other areas where there are large areas, is it reasonable to expect somebody to do that? Maybe it is. I mean, that's part of why we put some of that in there, to allow some, but not have it be a free for all.
I'm totally against trams. Like, trams are just like, no, absolutely not. No trams.
Well, thank you all. And we will definitely have, kind of like we did with the fees, this was our first stab at it. We'll bring this and some of the other ones back at the next meeting. So please take a look at these, and I will be working with Katie to add some of the additional concept ones in as I have them cleaned up and ready to be looked at over the next couple of weeks. So
and could you please add them to the Google Doc so that we can put our comments on these documents? I think that's really helpful. I don't know why we stopped doing it. At the last meeting, it didn't get into the shared Google Doc as well.
I don't know, Katie, do you have an answer on that?
Yeah, I will get these into the Google Doc by Monday.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for hanging past 4. I know we're 10 minutes over, so appreciate it. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we're going to go ahead and we'll end the meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.